And then I wake up on the floor in the kitchen like, He goes, old enough to talk to me like a man, old enough to get your ass beat like one.
Rick Harrison built a car empire worth millions. Over 30 classic vehicles filled his garages. His prized 1940 Chevy Deluxe sat alongside Ferraris and NASCAR tributes. But then the bills started piling up. $65,000 monthly alimony payments. His own mother suing him for $500,000. Legal fees crushing his cash flow. In 2025, something changed. Rick started making strange decisions about his beloved collection. He passed on a $100,000 Ferrari. He lowballed on cars he once would have bought instantly. What's really happening behind the Pawn Star's fortune? Rick Harrison was just 8 when his world broke apart. It started in 1973, lying in bed at the family's home in San Diego, when his head suddenly buzzed like tangled power lines. His body locked up. His tongue tore like hamburger meat. When it was over, he couldn't walk. Doctors called it focal onset aware seizures, but to Rick, it just meant pain. It happened every month for the next 10 years. The seizures damaged his muscles so badly, he sometimes couldn't get out of bed for weeks. Ice packs wrapped around his legs. Sometimes, he missed more than 200 days of school in a single year. He spent his childhood trapped between hospital visits and silent rooms, listening to the buzz in his skull and waiting for the next one to hit. While other kids played baseball, Rick read books. His mom brought him the Great Brain series from the library, and he fell in love with a boy named Tom, who pulled clever money-making schemes in small-town Utah. Rick devoured all 8 books in less than 2 weeks. He wanted to be Tom. He wanted to win. Then came history books. By age 12, Rick was reading about 18th century naval warfare, ancient coins, and obscure battles that most adults had never even heard of. Alone in his room, sweating from seizures, he unknowingly trained his brain for the job he'd become famous for decades later. He could spot details most people missed. He remembered everything. But life outside that bedroom was cruel. At Taft Middle School, the bullying never stopped. Kids mocked him for being different, for missing school, for twitching in his seat or looking pale and strange. He couldn't play sports. He couldn't run. He lived in fear of seizing in front of everyone. So he kept his head down and studied human behavior instead. Every insult taught him how people think. Every lonely lunch trained him to read faces and see weaknesses. What others called social rejection, Rick turned into survival training. Then everything collapsed. In 1981, when Rick was 16, his family lost everything. His mom, Joanne, had built a strong real estate business in the 70s, but the recession hit hard. Mortgage interest rates exploded to 18%. The housing market died overnight. Rick's dad, Richard, had just left the Navy after 20 years to help with the business. It was the worst timing imaginable. They lost $1 million. They had only $5,000 left in their bank account, barely enough to start over. So they left California behind. They packed up, drove across the desert, and landed in Las Vegas, hoping the lights would save them. It was a full reset. By then, Rick had already dropped out of 10th grade. School didn't make sense to him anymore. He was making $2,000 a week selling fake Gucci bags out of the San Diego garment district. That's over $7,000 a week today. He was 15. He'd buy knockoff bags for $30 and sell them for $300. When the competition undercut him, he switched to fake jeans. He built a whole underground empire while most teens were still playing arcade games. His dad was furious when he quit school, but he couldn't argue with the money. It lasted nearly 2 years. Then the market dried up, and Rick started looking for the next hustle. In 1982, something even bigger happened. His girlfriend, Kim, got pregnant. Rick was only 17, But then tragedy struck. She had a miscarriage. Most teenage couples wouldn't survive that kind of loss, but Rick and Kim got married anyway. Just months later, she got pregnant again. On April 27, 1983, their son Corey was born. Rick was 18. 2 years later, Adam arrived. But life with 2 babies and no money quickly became too much. In 1985, Kim walked out. She dropped the kids off and never came back. Rick was just 20, now a single father with 2 toddlers and a pile of unpaid bills. He had to pawn his comic book collection just to keep the lights on. Every day was survival. Vegas didn't offer easy answers. Rick sold bootleg VHS tapes on the street. He flipped cars in shady deals. In one stunt, he even used a winch truck to steal a car from a dealership service bay, driving off like he owned it. He got arrested for selling fake designer goods. He ran newspaper route scams. It wasn't pretty, but it kept food on the table. Every hustle sharpened his instincts. Every shady deal taught him how to assess value, spot lies, and read desperation. He was building a skill set without even knowing it. Back in the hospital waiting rooms, Rick started buying antique coins. He was 12 the first time he walked into a shop and picked up a Civil War-era piece. Something clicked. The weight, the patina, the story behind the metal. It all made sense. He bought more. He read everything. He studied how coins were minted, how artifacts aged, how fakes looked under light. His memory was perfect. His obsession with history mixed with real-world hustling created something rare. A kid who could both charm you and outthink you at the same time. That rare mix came from something darker. Rick had lost his sister Sherry when he was just a toddler. She was 6 when she died from health complications. The family never spoke much about it. But Rick felt the loss in the silence that followed. It changed how they all moved through the world. His parents carried the grief with them every day. Rick learned early that life could end without warning. That lesson stayed with him. He didn't trust happiness. He planned for disaster. And that's why when life broke down in 1981, he didn't fall apart. He adapted. He remembered. He rebuilt. In April 1981, Rick Harrison was just 16 when he arrived in Las Vegas with his family and barely $5,000 left in their name. His father's dreams of a Navy retirement had collapsed, and the desert city became their last hope. Rick got a job bussing tables in a casino, scrubbing dishes for $3.35 an hour while still attending high school. But by night, he was doing something else entirely. He was repossessing cars from people who had stopped paying their loans, driving through dangerous neighborhoods where one wrong move could get him hurt. Some nights, he earned more doing that than he did all month cleaning tables. His parents opened a tiny coin shop on Las Vegas Boulevard. Just 300 square feet, barely big enough to move around. That's where Rick saw what desperation really looked like. He watched gamblers stumble in and pawn their wedding rings for $20 loans, often at just 13 cents on the dollar. He memorized their faces. He started learning the game. And soon, he began selling counterfeit designer bags on the side, pulling in $2,000 a week, far more than school could ever offer. By 10th grade, he dropped out. Vegas was teaching him faster. But Rick wanted more than coins and fake Gucci. He wanted a pawn license. The problem was, Las Vegas law only allowed one license per 50,000 people. In 1981, the city wasn't big enough, so Rick waited. Every single week for nearly 2 years, he called the city statistician, asking for the latest population count. It became a joke in City Hall. He didn't care. In 1989, when the population finally hit 250,000, Rick saw his opening. But he wasn't the only one. Other pawn shop owners had paid politicians to block newcomers. The courtroom fights cost Rick and his father $15,000. But one day, the judge started hammering the opposition. Rick knew in that moment he had won. When the call came, he said, "I just hit the lottery." And he meant it. He opened the first 24-hour pawn shop in America at 7113 Las Vegas Boulevard South. The shop wasn't safe, not even close. This was the 1980s, and the mafia still had a grip on Vegas. Rick dealt with mob-connected customers who brought in stolen goods, hoping to clean the money. He once held a $10,000 Rolex Submariner in his hands, knowing it was probably hot, and gave the man $500 for it. No questions asked. He learned how to recognize stolen casino chips. He started buying rare mob memorabilia. One day, a loan went bad, and the customers came back armed. After that, Rick kept loaded guns behind the counter and hired security. Every deal came with a risk. He lived in that tension every single day. Then came the slot machine. In 1986, a casino was selling off old gear, and Rick spotted a 1930s Watling roll-a-top. The seller claimed it was worth $25 grand. Rick had read every book he could find on antique gambling machines. He realized this one was a rare prototype worth $75,000. He borrowed $50,000 against it, nearly his entire yearly inventory, when the shop was only making $250,000. It was a huge gamble. 3 months later, he sold it to a museum for $85,000 and made a $35,000 profit. That deal saved the shop and gave Rick a new reputation. People started bringing him high-end collectibles. That slot machine became the model for how he did business for the next 30 years. At home, Rick's life was no smoother. He married Kim in 1982 when she was pregnant, right after a miscarriage. He was just 17. By 1985, the shop had taken over his life. He worked 16-hour days, and the marriage didn't survive. In 1986, he married Tracy after a blind date and blended his 2 sons, Corey and Adam, into a new family. Times were tight. Rick started selling guns through the shop without a federal license. It brought fast money, but also trouble. The ATF began investigating when some of those weapons turned up in violent crimes. He was walking a thin line. His marriage to Tracy lasted 25 years. But the early years were built on 80-hour work weeks, 3 kids under 10, and hustling fake Gucci bags just to get by. By 1989, Rick officially became co-owner of the shop at 24 years old. Business grew fast. By 2005, he and his father were lending out $3 million a year and earning $700,000 in interest. But the shop became a magnet for addicts. People pawned Rolexes just to get gas money to drive home. Most never came back. Rick took their jewelry, their cars, sometimes even their homes. The 120-day loan window came and went, and he had no choice but to take what was left. It was brutal. But that's how the business worked. In the 1990s, Rick made another big move. Someone brought in what looked like a Confederate officer's sword from Gettysburg. It had been bought for just $75. Rick knew how to check tang markings, how to tell the difference between a fake and the real thing. He figured out it wasn't just a regular saber. It was an 1836 foot artillery sword. He brought in an expert to confirm it, paid $15,000 for it, and later sold it for $75,000. That deal made him a legend in the pawn community. People started trusting his eye for history. But it wasn't all smooth. His father still owned 51% of the business and refused to let go. The two clashed constantly. One fight was over a Ferrari that came in from a bankrupt gambler. Rick saw the potential. He restored it, detailed it, and flipped it for $200,000. His dad didn't like the risk, but Rick knew how to turn desperation into profit. That's what he'd always done. When the dot-com crash hit in 2000, Rick saw another opening. Tech workers flooded Vegas, pawning everything. Rick focused hard on sports memorabilia. He learned how to spot fake autographs, how to read signature patterns, how to prove a jersey was game-worn. One seller brought in a Muhammad Ali glove and pawned it for $5,000. Rick confirmed it was real. When the guy didn't return, Rick sold it for far more. That glove helped him survive the crash. In 2013, Rick married Deanna Burdett in a big ceremony with 180 guests in Laguna Beach. But by July 2020, the marriage ended quietly. He filed for divorce in Clark County, saying they had grown too different. Court records later revealed Rick had been paying $25,000 a month to family members. That dropped to $20,000, then stopped altogether by March 2020. When money got tight, Rick pawned his own 1940 Chevrolet just to stay liquid. He never signed a prenup. He always said, "You can take half my money, and I could still live like a king." But those choices came with a price. The divorce was finalized in September 2020, and Rick, once again, had to rebuild. On July 19, 2009, something unexpected happened on the History Channel. A quiet little pawn shop tucked into a rough part of downtown Las Vegas suddenly became one of the most watched shows in America. People weren't tuning in for explosions or crime scenes. They were watching a bald man with reading glasses haggle over old coins and Civil War rifles. That man was Rick Harrison, and he had no idea his life was about to change forever. Before the cameras arrived, Rick's shop saw maybe 50 customers on a busy day. He spent most afternoons sitting behind the counter, hoping someone would walk in with something interesting. But within a few months of Pawn Stars airing, the numbers exploded. By 2010, over 500,000 people were watching each episode. Tourists started flooding into the gold and silver pawn shop, not to sell anything, but just to see it. They weren't there for Rolexes or antique pistols. They came for Rick. He had to bring in security just to keep the peace. Some days, over 1,200 people walked through those doors. What used to be a struggling business now needed crowd control. Rick didn't plan any of this. He wasn't an actor. But his calm voice, sharp brain, and deep love for history made people trust him. He wasn't flashy. He just knew his stuff. Whether it was a signed Hemingway book or a rusty revolver, Rick could explain where it came from, who made it, and what it was really worth. The show felt real because it was. It didn't have a script. Rick just did what he always did: buy low, sell high, and make sure no one walked out angry. By 2016, Rick was making $15,000 every time a new episode aired. By 2023, that number climbed as high as $100,000 per episode, depending on contracts. Viewers stuck with the show because it never tried to be something it wasn't. It was still just a pawn shop. But sometimes, the items that came through the door were shocking. In one episode, a man walked in with O.J. Simpson's white Ford Bronco, the exact SUV from the 1994 slow-speed chase. The seller was Simpson's former agent. He wanted $1.3 million. Rick looked at it carefully, took his time, and passed. "Too much risk," he said. It was iconic, yes, maybe the most infamous car in American history. But Rick didn't want the heat. Another time, someone tried to sell a stolen coin collection worth $50,000. The shop took it in, but claimed they melted it down before anyone realized. That move sparked legal trouble and lawsuits. Rick's job wasn't just buying and selling anymore. Now it was surviving the spotlight. As the show grew, so did everything around it. Pawn Stars got picked up in over 100 countries. Suddenly, people from Brazil to Belgium knew Rick's face. The royalties added up fast, and Rick's net worth hit $9 million. Meanwhile, his son Corey bought a $1 million home in 2013 and sold it for $239 million just 3 years later. the pawn shops surrounding neighborhood boomed. Property prices jumped, and fans began traveling across the world just to take selfies outside the building. Pawn Stars wasn't just a show anymore, it was a Las Vegas attraction. But behind the scenes, the family wasn't as solid as they looked on TV. In 2021, everything cracked wide open. Rick's own mother, Joanne Harrison, filed a lawsuit against him. She said that when her husband, Richard Old Man Harrison, was in a coma, Rick tricked her into giving up her 51% ownership of the shop. Joanne claimed Rick stopped sending her the $25,000 monthly payments she'd been getting after Old Man's death in 2018. She also said Rick was hiding more than $500,000 in cash and silver her husband had stashed away. In March 2022, she went further and got a temporary restraining order to stop Rick from touching the family assets. At the same time, Rick and Corey weren't getting along either. Tensions flared on set. They disagreed on how to run things. The happy family people saw on screen was slowly unraveling. Rick had written a book in 2011 called License to Pawn. He talked about his wild early years, his deep love for math, and how he built the shop from scratch. He shared stories about the craziest items that ever came through the door. That same white Ford Bronco came up again, the one he turned down for $1.3 million after it had once been offered $500,000. Rick knew its value. He just didn't want that kind of attention. He also talked about the pieces he would never sell: a Patriots Super Bowl ring, 3 Olympic bronze medals, a 1490 samurai sword, and an original Iwo Jima battle plan. For Rick, those weren't just collectibles, they were history. But things got risky in 2015. The IRS came knocking. Rick's merchandise business was booming. They were selling Pawn Stars mugs, shirts, and even replica items based on the show. But investigators found over $500,000 in silver stashed in a family trust that hadn't been reported. That triggered a full federal audit. Agents froze accounts and took records. History Channel panicked. Their top-rated show was suddenly at risk. Filming nearly stopped. Rick had to hire lawyers and pay heavy fines. He spent months restructuring everything just to keep the doors open. And then, in 2018, something happened that reminded people why Rick was still the best at what he did. A man brought in what looked like a NASA rocket engine. The seller said it came from Apollo mission surplus. Rick didn't just nod along. He examined serial numbers, identified stamp codes, and contacted NASA archives. He confirmed it was real, a training engine used to prepare astronauts for lunar missions in the 60s and 70s. Rick bought it for $100,000. A few weeks later, he sold it at an aerospace auction for over $1 million. It was one of the best deals in Pawn Stars history. And Rick did it not with luck, but with skill, patience, and years of study. In 1981, Rick Harrison's parents opened a small pawn shop in Las Vegas called the Gold and Silver Pawn. It was supposed to be a family business. His father, Richard, the man everyone would later call the Old Man, had spent 20 years in the Navy. His mother, Joanne, worked quietly behind the scenes. Rick was still young then, just learning the trade. Over time, the shop grew. Then, in 2009, everything changed. The family stepped into the spotlight when Pawn Stars hit the History Channel. It exploded overnight, pulling in millions of viewers. People loved the banter, the haggling, the old items. They saw laughter, deals, and history lessons. But behind the counters and the cameras, things were starting to break. Not just in business, in the family. By 2018, the Old Man was gone. Richard Harrison died on June 25th after fighting Parkinson's disease for years. He was 77. At his funeral, the flag-draped casket honored his Navy service. He left behind 3 sons, 10 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. But his will had one shocking line. He wrote that he intentionally and with full knowledge failed to provide for his youngest son, Christopher. No explanation, just silence. The bulk of his $5 million went to Joanne and Rick, but it wouldn't bring peace. In February 2022, Joanne, now 81, sued her own son. She said Rick had tricked her during her weakest moment, back in 2000 or 2001, when she was lying in a coma in Valley Hospital's ICU. According to her, while she was fighting for her life, Rick brought her papers she couldn't understand and got her to sign away her 51% ownership of the pawn shop. That wasn't just paperwork. It was the majority share of the empire she and her husband built from scratch. Rick said she was being manipulated by outsiders, but the lawsuit revealed something deeper than just contracts. It was about betrayal. Joanne also claimed Rick had hidden money from her. Before Richard died, he had secretly gathered $500,000 worth of silver and $100,000 in cash. After his death, Joanne inherited his 49% stake in the business. She said Rick never gave her a full picture of the assets. At first, from 2018 to 2020, she received $25,000 per month to cover her expenses. Then Rick dropped it to $20,000. Then, in March 2020, as the pandemic began, the money stopped completely. Joanne went to court. A judge issued a restraining order blocking Rick from selling business assets until the case was resolved. At the center of the storm was a mysterious $3 million loan from Nevada State Bank. And just like that, the show's cheerful family image cracked wide open. Rick's own life wasn't getting any easier. His marriages kept collapsing. He'd been married 3 times and divorced 3 times. And he never signed a prenup. That choice cost him more than $10 million in alimony. In a 2025 interview, he said he thought each one would last forever. "You can take half my money," he said, "and I can still live like a king." But the numbers weren't small. He was paying over $65,000 a month just in alimony. His most recent divorce was in 2021, ending a 7-year marriage to Deanna. That split, he said, happened partly because of political arguments about COVID-19 vaccines. To keep up with payments, Rick had to sell stocks. Still, he shrugged off the losses, saying money was only his 3rd or 4th favorite thing in the world. In 2016, the show took another hit. On March 9th, police raided Chumley's house in Las Vegas during a sexual assault investigation. What they found wasn't what they expected. They uncovered methamphetamine, nearly 4 ounces of marijuana, and an entire room called the Chum Chum Room, outfitted with a stripper pole, rolled up dollar bills with white residue, and drug gear everywhere. There were also guns, a Ruger 357 revolver, a Sig Sauer handgun, and a 12-gauge shotgun. Chumley faced 19 drug charges and 1 weapons charge. His bail was set at $62,000. Viewership dropped by 20%. Rick tried to stand by him, saying they didn't have all the facts yet and would help however they could. But the damage to the show's clean image was done. In 2024, Rick faced a loss no parent ever wants. On January 19th, his oldest son Adam died at 39 from fentanyl and methamphetamine toxicity. The coroner ruled it accidental. Rick posted on Instagram, "You will always be in my heart. I love you, Adam." In later interviews, he said Adam had struggled for years. Rehab helped sometimes, but the relapses kept coming. Rick blamed the fentanyl crisis and called for stronger border security. He said he thought about Adam every single day. The grief changed him. He started speaking out about drug abuse. He didn't want other families to feel this kind of pain. Rick knew what it was like to struggle early. When he was just 8 years old, he was diagnosed with epilepsy. The seizures came monthly. They isolated him. He couldn't play with other kids, couldn't do the things normal boys did. So he stayed inside. He read. History books became his escape. He damaged muscles during seizures so badly that he sometimes couldn't even walk. By the time he was 18, the seizures stopped, but they shaped him. Today, Rick works with the Epilepsy Foundation and sits on their board. In 2021, he partnered with Neurellis to raise awareness about seizure emergencies. Not all news was bad. On March 6, 2025, Rick got engaged to Angie Poloshkin, a 42-year-old nurse from Las Vegas. He proposed in Chile's Casablanca Valley. They had started dating in early 2024 and went public that summer. After the engagement, Rick shared a photo of him down on one knee with the caption, "She said yes." It was his 5th time, but friends said this one felt different. Angie had been by his side through some of the darkest months after Adam's death. The proposal came just after Rick's 60th birthday on March 22nd. It felt like a new chapter. Still, the rumors never stopped. In 2025, a fake YouTube video claimed Rick had been sentenced to life in prison for trafficking looted artifacts. It got 2.5 million views. AI images showed Rick in an orange jumpsuit. People believed it until fact-checkers exposed the lie. There was no FBI raid, no arrest, no trial. Snopes called it false. Rick laughed it off, posting on social media to prove he was free. His body, though, was tired. Back in 2010, court documents mentioned he had constant pain in his knees, back, shoulders, and feet. He had surgery on his back. The pandemic hit his business hard. Fewer people pawned items. Tourism dropped. The shop suffered. Lawsuits came in waves. Former employees, partners, trademark fights. And still, he showed up. As of October 2025, Rick's net worth sits around $12 million. He makes about $100,000 per Pawn Stars episode. The pawn shop earns $700,000 annually just from loan interest. Since February 2025, his Pawn After Dark podcast with Chumlee has aired 21 episodes. Big names like Steve Aoki, Bret Michaels, and TJ Lavin have come on. Despite fake stories of bankruptcy, Rick is financially stable. His income flows from TV, the pawn shop, real estate, and the podcast. He still loves cars. His collection has over 30 classics. His favorite is a 1940 Chevy Deluxe. He's not auctioning them off, despite rumors. Some people saw him pass on a $100,000 Ferrari 308 or offer $90,000 for a $125,000 NASCAR tribute car and assumed he was desperate. But Rick says it's not about panic. It's about smart business. He buys what he loves. He keeps what matters. He's also a pro at spotting fakes. With scams in crypto hitting $10 billion in 2024, Rick's pawn shop instincts help. He once authenticated 2,500-year-old coins and real NASA rocket parts. He knows how to test amber, how to spot counterfeits. He went on Yahoo Finance in October 2025 to talk about gold, explaining how a 5-gram ring now sells for around $700. His shop inventory today includes Picasso sketches and original art from Where the Wild Things Are. He's no longer just a TV star. He's become a trusted voice in gold, history, and high-value collectibles. Now, in 2025, he's planning to franchise the gold and silver pawn brand internationally by 2026. The podcast is growing fast, Pawn Stars is on hiatus, but Rick isn't slowing down. He's giving shop tours, making media appearances, and speaking out about epilepsy, addiction, and resilience. After all the losses, lawsuits, lies, pain, and pressure, he's still standing behind the counter.